Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome back to another session of this back-end application development. Can you hear me, please? Is my audio loud and clear? All right. So at this juncture, today's session we'll be talking about API. We're talking about API. So we'll be looking at more in depth of what an API is. What do you do with an API? If you recall, the last previous sessions we held, we were talking about that. I think the first previous session, the first session we held on back-end application development, we were talking about components that made up the back-end. We mentioned the programming languages, right, as part of the component. We mentioned databases, right? And then we mentioned API, and then we also mentioned servers. All right. So last week we talked about servers. So today we'll be talking about API. API. So we are going to see what APIs are. So in today's outline, we'll be looking at the introduction to API. Next, we will look at the types of APIs, and then we'll see why is API so important, and then how do API work, and then what are the API, what is API integration, how to create an API, down to API testing, and how to use API and how to write API documentation. So this is what we are looking at today, by the grace of God. So we start with the introduction to API. What is an API? API basically stands for Application Programming Interface. It stands for Application Programming Interfaces. So basically, these API, they are mechanisms that enable two software components to communicate with each other using a set of definitions and protocols. If you remember earlier on, at the very first session on back-end application development, we described API as let's say as a communication bridge, right? Something that allows two different software systems to communicate with each other. So here we are saying APIs are mechanisms that enable two software components to communicate with each other using a set of definitions and protocol. Simply, that is what API is. For example, the weather uh, applications or softwares we have, right, contains weather of our daily, contains the detailed weather information for our environment, right? So the weather app on your phone talks to the system where such actual information is via API, right? And shows you daily weather updates on your phone. You can go to the stores. When I say stores, I mean Google Play Store or App Store and download applications uh, that are designed to provide weather information, right? There are a lot of them. If you search the if you search the Google Store or the Play Store, a lot of them do exist. Applications that give you weather information, they do exist. But these applications, they do not actually hold the data because it's dynamic, right? It's dynamic. So they don't actually hold those information inside the phone, inside the application. So what actually happens, the app on your phone, after you download it, it talks to the system that it talks to the system, right, that contains such weather information via an API, and then it shows you the daily weather update on your phone. So that is how it works. That is the basic explanation of that, how the weather application works, and the explanation of API. So API stands for Application Programming Interface. Like I said, in the context of APIs, the word application refers to any software with a distinct function. Yeah, so it's very important to clear that out. You keep hearing, okay, application software, okay, the app on your phone. On our phones, we call them apps, right? Apps, application. And then, yeah, so many other softwares, you see, we call them applications. Okay, mobile application, web application, desktop application. Why do we call them application? So basically, it's saying here the word application refers to any software with a distinct function. If a software has a distinct function, yeah, it's an application. So why is it that we call our apps, mobile apps? They are mobile applications. We call them applications because each and every of those software on our phones, they have their own distinct application. That is why they have their own distinct usage purpose. That is it. So are you following me? Are you guys online following me? Am I loud and clear? All right. Thank you. So interface can be thought of as a contract of service between two applications, right? So application programming interface. So the interface can be thought of as a contract of service between the two applications. You see, right? You see, in the definition, we mentioned that the API allowed them to communicate from one software to another software or between softwares, right? So there's something that has to there's something that has to allow them. So that's the interface, right? So it can be thought of as a contract of service between the two applications. This contract defines how the two communicate with each other using requests and responses. So the communication we're talking about here, of course, it goes in a way of request and response. Yes. So the API documentation contains information of how developers are to structure their requests and responses. So when an API is being designed, right, or developed, from the origin, from the developer of that API, maybe I'm issuing an API, I will have to give you a documentation. And that documentation will contain information that your developer will be used to structure how they send the request to my system, right? Or how a developer will send a request to any other system that you are interested in, and how the response is going to be, and how you are expecting the response, how the response should be. So that is basically it. That is basically how it is. I'm trying to bring this down to a very, very simple and easy way to understand. I'm sure I'm all right. Already explored the main types of architectures. So let's look at the scope of use. The last class, I think one of the previous classes, I think, okay, it was the initial class. So I mentioned that we have a REST API, right? In terms of types of API, we have the REST, and then we have the SOAP. the categorization based on the scope of use. So we have private APIs. So private APIs are internal to an enterprise and only used for connecting systems and data within the business, right? So what does that basically mean? Okay, it means let's say you have a business, you have an office, you have an enterprise, you have an organization that is very big, and then you have two different systems, right? You have two different systems, but you want these systems were probably maybe developed separately, right? As a result of probably you had one of the systems earlier, and then there was need for another system to be developed to handle another side of the business and what have you. Yeah. So and then systems are being developed now, and then you want them you want them to have a medium where they can communicate with each other, where one can fetch information from the other. So, and then you can now create a private API where you use within that organization, where you can use it within that business. Or let's say, for example, yes, it's a single business, an enterprise, but you have different branches. We have different branches. So you can, yeah, so that can also come in. So you can just create an API from one of the system developed to another system, whereby they can be communicating, they can be maybe fetching information and all that. Okay, for example, let me give you a more sensible and realistic example. You have a system, an employee management system, right, in your business, where it contains all the necessary data and relevant information regarding your employee, everything about your employee. It it's contained in that employee management system. And then all of a sudden, you want to start issuing loans to your employees. You want to start issuing loans to your employees. So, and then you decide to develop another system that handles and manages loan, everything related to loan, right? Everything related to loan. So, but then you now want to use the data on the system. You want to use the data of your employees, but you don't want to like start putting new data of employee that have already existed in another system into this new loan system, right? That will not be nice. Abi? So yeah, so the good thing to do something like this to do is to create an API, right? Is to create an API for that for that particular purpose, where it will fetch the information, the relevant details of the employees from the employee management system you already have before, maybe such as the employee name, such as the employee ID, the designation, and maybe return, maybe salaries and all the relevant details that are relevant to loans. You now create an API for that, and then it will now you now use it with the loan system. So it will now be fetching all the relevant information that is being required for the loan processing. It will now be fetching it from that employee management system. So that is how you can use that internal, as a private API. And then when we talk about the next one as the public APIs, the public API are open to the public and may be used by anyone. Yeah, there may or may not be some authorization and cost associated with these types of APIs. So, for example, okay, you want to, and let me give you an example of this public API, right? So, for example, now you want to employ staff in your organization, right? In your business, you have a system in place and policies in place that before every staff would be employed in your organization can apply, that particular staff must be verified identities. That particular staff's identity must be verified to know who exactly that person is. So we have NIMSI right here in this country that manages the identity of individuals, identity of citizens. All right. So I'm just giving an example for you to know. Okay, and then this agency that handles identity, right, that manages identity of citizens, they will say, for example, they said, okay, we have an API, right, available to everyone that is developing the system where they want to identify, where they want to verify the identity of staff, of identity of individuals before employing them. So we have an API available. So if you want that API, you can come to us, or we can go to our website, right? After going to our website, you can get the documentation of that API, and then you can use it in your system, right? Okay. So now this API is available online, is available out for the public to use on their system. Or you can say, or they can say, you can write us a letter. After writing us a letter, and then we give it out to you. So it's available. Yeah. So it's not it does it will not come at a cost, right? But we will want to know what you want to do with it before we give you the API, something like that. So you can decide to say, okay, you want to use it to verify the identity of staff before we employ them. All right. So these are example of API that are available to the public. So everyone can decide he wants to use the API, and everyone that decide he wants to use the API will be readily available for him. So for example, this example I've given of employing. So and then you now have a system that applicants will apply online, but before applying online, they will have to provide their NIN, national identification number. So if they apply, so if they after they enter their national identification number, okay, your own system, your own employee recruitment system will now via the API that you're using will now go and talk to the NIMSI system, NIMSI server to look for your identification, to verify your identity, and then return back a feedback on your identity before proceeding with the application. So that is just a simple analogy, right? Simple example. Are you all with me, please? Are you with me on this? All right. Thank you. So that is a simple analogy of a public API in terms of use. So next we have partner APIs. These are only accessible by authorized external developers to aid business to business partnership. So these can come maybe as a way of agreement. Okay, my business and okay, Mr. A's business and Mr. B's business, right? They come together. They have an agreement, right? They say, okay, we want authorization. We want your AP. We want authorization for your system for so information, so communication. Okay, we agree. Okay, and then you agree, and then we give you system. So these kind of API are only accessible to authorized external developers to aid business to business partnership. So your business and my business now, the system communicates. We we kind of maybe share okay the information that we want relating to our business, relating to our. So that is just basically that. And then we have a composite APIs. These are these combine two or more different API to address a complex system requirement or behavior. So as it is right now, as it is said, composite, like it basically means something that is more than one, right? So this one said This API is a combination of two or more different APIs to address complex system requirements or behavior. So that is with you. All right. So I have somebody who said that is not with us. Okay. Somebody. Okay, I'm with you. All right. Thank you. So I think we can proceed now, right? All right. So next is we keep talking about API, and when you're in the tech industry, you keep hearing about the API. When you're in the development industry, we keep hearing about API. So and now we know what API is. So but why is API so important? Why are API so important? So let's look at why they are actually important. API endpoints are the final touchpoint in the API communication system. These include server URLs, services, and other specific digital locations from where information is sent and received between systems. API endpoints are critical to enterprises for two main reasons. Okay, so API is important because of one, security. So API endpoints, they make the system vulnerable to attack. API monitoring is crucial for preventing misuse. So we are talking about API endpoints. You know, endpoints. Yeah. So these API endpoints, right, they make the system vulnerable to attack. API monitoring is crucial for preventing misuse. So because at some point, right, you might give out your API, you might give out an API to your system, right? But maybe the person you're giving out might misuse it, might misuse it. So that is why that is why security is important, right? You will have to always look at how you can how you can prioritize security. So second is performance. API endpoints, especially high traffic ones, can cause bottleneck and affect system performance. So those are the major reasons why API is important: security and performance. So now let's look at how do APIs work. How do API work? API architecture is usually explained in terms of client and server. Yes. So if you remember, we talked about client server architecture the last week when we were talking about servers. We talk about client and servers. So usually API architecture is usually in terms of that, the client and the server. Of course, there has to be a client and there has to be a server. The server is the one that is serving that information, while the client is the one that is requesting, is the one that is receiving, that information. The application sending the request is called the client, right? Yes, that is the one sending the information. And the application sending the response is called the server. Yeah. So it's a response and request. Always put it at the back of your mind, right? Wherever you hear server, right? It's serving. It's something that it's a computer that is serving, or let's say the one that is responding, while the client, right, is the one that is requesting and responding. So that is just always remember that. associate that. So I like in this I like giving you example with regarding the weather application, regarding the weather application. So in the weather example, like I gave earlier, the weather database is the server, right? I hope you are with me. The weather database is the server, and the mobile application which you downloaded from the store and to you are using to know information about your weather is the client. So that is just it. That is just how it is. So in the so, so there are four different ways that API can work depending on when and why they were created. All right. So is everyone with me on this? All right. All right, I'm with you. All right, so let's proceed. So let's look at the SOAP API. SOAP. SOAP API. Why do we call them the SOAP API? Actually, the SOAP stands for Simple Object Access Protocol. That is it. So these API use the Simple Object Access Protocol. That is just why we call them SOAP API. SOAP. Yeah. So client and server exchange messages using XML, extensive markup language. So that is just it. This is just because the client and the server they exchange messages using XML. They exchange messages using XML. Great. So next we have the RPC API, remote procedure calls, remote procedure calls API. These APIs are called remote procedure calls. Why? Because the client completes a function or a procedure on the server, right? And the server sends the output back to the client. So basically as the client sends the request, right? It completes the functions, it completes the function as in the whatever procedure or function that is requesting for, it completes it on the server, right? And then the server after complete and then the server sends back the output to the client. So that is just on that. So next we have the WebSocket API. Next we have the WebSocket API. These are another modern web API development that uses JSON objects to pass data. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. Yeah. So these web APIs, they use these JSON objects to pass data. A WebSocket API supports two-way communication between a client app and the server app. So this particular type of API, the web API, right? It supports two-way communication, to and fro. So between the client and the server, and between the server and the client. The server can send callback messages to connected clients, making it Are we together? All right. Okay. So like I was saying, the REST API are the most popular and flexible APIs found on the web today. The client sends requests to the server as data. And then the server, on the other hand, uses this client's input to start internal function and return output data back to the client. Yes. So that is that is how the REST API works. So the client sends request to the server as a data, right? The server uses the client's imputed data to start internal functions and then return output back to the client. So let's look at REST API more. So so the REST actually is an acronym. It stands for Representational State Transfer. Yes. REST API, it defines a set of functions like get, put, right? Delete, etc. So those are the kind of function that the REST API defines, right? That clients can run to access the server data. So clients and server exchange data using HTTP, using the hypertext transfer protocol. You know, that's the web protocol. If you look at your web browser, before any domain name and address, you see HTTPS. Yeah, so that is hypertext transfer protocol. Yeah, so that is the protocol that is being used to transfer transfer your text over the internet, transfer your data and the information you're sending over the internet. So the main feature of the REST API is that it has statelessness. It is statelessness. It doesn't have a state. That is the the main feature of the REST API. Statelessness means that servers do not save client data between requests. So that is it. So as a client, when you send data, when you send data request, right? When you send data request to the server, this one, the server do not save the client data. So client requests to the servers are similar to URLs. So it goes in the form of URL in the REST API. So the API, that is how it kind of looks in the form of URL. You know what a URL is, right? So URL stands for Universal Resource Locator. So it's basically www.mybusiness.com.ng. That's my business URL, right? My business URL. It's a universal resource locator. It's universal, right? Because of course it's around the internet, around the globe. It's a global, right? And then resource, which means what I have, my website, my website, my system online, my everything is my resource, and then is a locator. It locates it locates my business, it locates my website, it locates my information anywhere around the world. So that is why it's called a URL. You can say maybe you keep hearing, you keep hearing they say, okay, send me the link to the website, send me the link to the. So instead of saying link, you can say URL. The URL sounds much more like technical, it's just like a technical way of saying link, all right, or something like that. Okay, so they are similar to URL you type in your browser to visit a website. So that is how the REST API are. If you see them, you see them like a link. Yeah. So the response from the server is plain data without the typical graphical rendering of a web page. So when you send a request using a REST API, right? So when you are expecting a response, a feedback, so this feedback is going to come in the form of plain data, like the data that I requested for. Is it the name? Is it the name of the person? Maybe you are trying to identify from the national identification database. Is it the name of the person, the first name, last name, middle name? Is it the phone number? Is it the driver's license? Is it whatever it is? Whatever it is. So yeah, so it will return it as a plain data. All right. So let's move on. So let's also look at what web APIs are. A web API or web service API is an application processing interface, right, between a web server and a web browser. So that is just that in simple terms. So the web API is basically an application processing interface between a web server and the web browser. Remember, the browser is the client. The browser is the client, and then you have a server somewhere that you are fetching that information with. So that uses web. That is a web API. All web service all web services are APIs, but not all APIs are web services. Mind you, please take note of that statement. Please take note of that statement. And it goes like that. It says all web services are APIs. All web services are APIs, but not all APIs are web services. Right? Uh-huh. Any question, please? Do we have any question? Moment. Okay. So are we on the same page? All right. So let's move on. So REST API is a special type of web API that uses the standard architectural style explained above. Okay, we have a question. Okay, Odunton. So can you explain more on that? All right. I guess you are talking about the statement. This says that all web services are APIs, right? But not all APIs are web services. Okay. Let me try and explain this in a very, very plain, easy, and simple way. Right? So remember in the definition or explanation of API, right? Remember we said API. Remember we said API. They facilitate communication between two systems, right? Between two application systems, two software systems, right? One is sending a request, right? and the other is receiving the response. That is API, right? So that is what an API does. Allow communication between two different software. So now look at your computer, the web browser, right, as the client, right? And then there's another business. There's a business out there that has a server, that has a lot of information, that has services, that have products you want or you need, right? And then you want to request for such. And then you communicate, you send a request from your browser, who is a client, from your computer also, who is a client, to another computer, a server at another location, right? And then you fetch for that services, right? Is it information you want is it information you want from that particular location that you're requesting? Is it a service? Is it a product you want to use? Are you getting my point? Are you with me on this? So now you're communicating from your own client to that server. There's a communication, right? There's sending of information, right? There's request and there's response, right? In the web. So yes. So that is the statement that says all web services are API. Let's say all web services are API. That is that particular statement. It goes like that. But it says not all APIs are web services. Remember, I mentioned you that. Okay, let me finish explaining this. Not all APIs are web services. So there are other APIs that they are not services. You cannot use them for anything. They are APIs just for you to return a particular data, be it, let's say, license number from another different system, be it, let's say, username. They are not services. They are not giving you any services. They are just returning an information. What can you use that information for? Right? It's nothing if you don't have an actual system that will consume the information that will work on it. So you remember we said the REST API. Remember we said the REST API is in the form of a web URL, right? So if I give you an API now, it might just be returning something you don't understand. It might just be opening one jargons for you. You don't understand what it means because you don't have another system that will actually consume and then process and then utilize that API for you. So you will not really understand what that URL is returning, what that API is returning. So it cannot be of any use to you. Rather, it can only be used to a particular system that has been developed to consume that. Do you understand that? Are you with me on this? Okay, because for example, for example, we can have an API. That API will just return the first name, last name, and then date of birth, age from the from the let's say NIMSI website. But if you don't have another system that will properly give you the formatted information, display it in a formatted way, and then consume it. Because if you open the API, you just see jargons, computer language, and all those kind of things. Some things you don't really understand. Encrypted, and because it's encrypted and all that, so many other things. So that is how it is. All right, thank you very much. So that's great. All right, thank you very much. So let's move on that. The different terms around API, right, like Java API or Service API, exist because historically APIs were created before the World Wide Web. That's true. APIs have existed before the creation of the World Wide Web, internet. That's the W. So the www is the www in every URL, every website you want to visit actually stands for World Wide Web. That is the meaning of that www dot. www.mybusiness.com, www dot something something something. So that's the World Wide Web. Yeah. Modern web APIs are REST APIs, and the term can be used interchangeably. So, moving on, let's look at API integration. So, API integrations are software components that automatically update data between clients and servers. So, what this integration means, like, right, is that this API integration, they automatically update the data between a client and a server. A very good example of API integrations are when automatic data synchronization to the cloud from your phone image gallery, or the time and date automatically sync on your laptop when you travel to another time zone. So that is basically simple analogy and simple example of API integration. A lot of us have smartphones. We have smartphones. Not even a lot of us. All of us have smartphones. We have computers. We have cloud. We have cloud services. If I say cloud services, if you're using Android, you have a Google account, right? Which hosts your email, right? Your photo, Google Photos, calendar, and all that. They automatically integrate onto our Android phones, right? And then on the other hand, for people that have Apple iOS, right, you have iCloud, right? So there also you have iPhotos, right? You have calendar, you have message, you have mails, you have, yeah. So all these services, right? They integrate they integrate with your device and your cloud automatically. So when I send you an email, when I send you an email, right, you will get it on your phone, boom, with a notification, right? You will receive it and then open it and then read the email on your phone, even reply it on your phone. Is that not so? But that email, is it actually on your phone? Are you actually receiving it directly to your phone? Are you receiving it directly on your phone? That email? Because that email is going to gmail.com, right? It's going to gmail.com. But you are receiving it on your phone. You are reading it on your phone. You are replying it from your phone, right? Likewise, likewise for your photos. There's a setting you can do, right? It's automatic synchronization settings, right? Whereby you take a picture from your phone directly. You went out, maybe you went for a party or you went for a visit, and then you snap some pictures with your phone, right? So immediately you go back home and then open your computer and then to is it iPhotos, is it photos, or maybe Google Drive, and then you see those pictures there. So which means they have automatically synchronized, right? they have automatically synchronized from your phone to the cloud services. So those are that is what we mean by API integration. So there was a communication, right? There was a communication between your handheld device and the cloud server, you are subscribing to, or the cloud server services you are working with. So enterprises can also use them to efficiently automate many system functions. So like the API integration. So like a lot of businesses, organization and enterprises, right? They can use it to efficiently automate many system functions. They can use it to automate many system functions. Right. So now let's look at how to create an API. Let's look at how to create an API. So for the practical class, for the practical class that we are holding on Saturday, we are working on developing an entire system. That is what we are doing. The last upper week, and then the last week, we are still working on developing the same system, right? Continue from what we stopped. So this week also, this coming weekend, the next practical class, we are going to see how we can integrate an API, how we can create an API, right? How we can integrate it to the system we're developing to assist us with some information, to assist us with some services. For example, to be specific, actually, we are developing an e-commerce system, all right, in the practical session of this course. We are trying to develop an e-commerce system. And when we are developing an e-commerce system, where we are going to need an API, where we are going to need API is, you know, e-commerce, we have to do with payment. We have to do with payment by engagement. So where we are going to need an API is where we are going to integrate the payment gateway, the payment system to our system are developing. So we are going to look at that by the grace of God, the next practical class. How we can integrate an API, a payment gateway API. For example, now you went online, you want to buy something. Okay, be it you went to an online store such as Jumia, Konga, GG, and the rest, right? Uh, and or maybe you wanted to buy other services such as electricity, or maybe uh, what other service? Okay, or maybe cable network, maybe DSTV, and all that. From an application in the app, they will link you. They will link you to some other places like Paystack, right? Remitter, and maybe Flutterwave, right? Flutterwave. Those are the one of the popular payment gateway. So you see that from this system, right? You want to make payment, but they've redirected you to another place. It's not in the website. If you notice, most of the times it's not on the website. It will redirect you to Remitter, right? You fill in your card number, other things on it, other information, and then you make payment to it. When your payment is successful, it will then also redirect you back to the initial website you are working in. So we are going to look at that by this coming next practical class. So that is basically the API activities. So let's look at how we look at that practical. So for now, so due to due diligence and efforts are required to build an API that other developers will want to work with and trust. Yes. These are 5 steps required for high quality API design. So the steps we are going to see, right? There are 5. Actually, here's the type of survey. There are 5. There are 5 steps required for high quality API design. The first step in API design is to plan the API. What does it mean to plan the API? Okay, you want to create an API, right? Okay, what do you want to create the API for? Who do you want to create the API for? What do you want that API to do? What information do you want it to contain? Like, that is the plan of the API. Do you want, okay, who your target benefactors from that API? Who should that API be for? All these are part of planning the API. So like the API specifications, okay, like Open API provide the blueprint for your API design. It is better to think out. It is better to think about different use cases in advance and ensure the API adheres to current API development standards. Okay, like, and then like what type of API do you want it to be? Is it the normal REST API you want it to be? You want to create it in the form of normal REST API and all that. So you just have to look at that. So it is better to think about different use cases in advance when you are dealing, when you want to think of, when you are planning the API, and ensure the API adheres to the current API development standards. So after planning the API, and you are very, very convinced and you are very, very satisfied with the plan you've made for that, with the plan you made for that API, right? So next, you now go ahead and then build the API. So API designers prototype APIs using boilerplate code. Once the prototype is tested, developers can customize it to internal specification. So next, we have then test the API. We have plan the API number 1, right? 2, we have build the API, and then 3, we are having test the API. So API testing is the same as software testing and must be done to prevent bugs and defects. You know, when a software is developed, there is a particular stage in the development process. We call that the testing stage. You know, in software development, there's what we call SDLC, Software Development Lifecycle, right? Is a development methodology, the SDLC. So testing is a phase on its own in software development for testing, in software design and development for testing. So API testing is the same as software testing, which must be done to prevent bugs and defects. API's testing tool can be used to strengthen test the API against cyber attack. See, these are another thing very, very key you should always look at. Cyber attack. Presently, every single thing you are doing, right, that will that is that will be connected to the internet. Even if you're not connected to the internet, your computer also, you have to always look at cyber attack. You have to always be cyber conscious, because we are in a stage whereby a lot of things, we have the reality, we have the physical reality, like physical reality, and we have the cyber reality, right? I call that a cyber reality. So yes, you can go and hustle your millions physically, go and do everything that's being required. But cyber, with the cyber, they can just ruin your life, and trust me, you will be ruined. So you have to always be cyber conscious. So API testing tools can be used to strengthen test the API against cyber attacks. So you have to also look like the API. Can it be used for cyber attack? Can it exploit your system? Like can the malicious guys use your API to harm you, to harm your system and all that? You have to put all that into consideration. You have to always try to think outside the box. Yeah. So next, after testing the API and you are satisfied that okay, like it's fine, it's good, and it has crossed the cyber attack possibilities, then you now do the documentation. You now document the API. So documenting the API entails creating a guide to improve usability of to improve usability. Well-documented API that offer a range of functions and use cases tend to be more popular in service-oriented architecture. So usually, right, API documentations are very key. If you create an API, you can give documentation. Documentation is what another developer or what another partner or what another system that can use to communicate with your system. You are the one that will tell them how to structure their request to your system. So, for example, now I want to communicate with your system. You are the one that will give me protocol now. You are the one that will give me how you want to now. So because I'm the one that is looking for something from you, and you like doing your things this way, so I will have to do your own way, right? Since it's me, I wanting something from you, I'm coming to you, so I will have to follow your own way, your own rules, right? So that is it. So that is why there's API documentation. So you document it, and then you give it to the interested party on how they can communicate with. So we said while APIs are self-explanatory, API documentation acts as a guide to improve usability. Yes. So well-documented APIs that offer a range of functions and use cases tend to be more popular in a service-oriented architecture. So after that is being done, you have developed a documentation for your API, right? Then the next one is market the API. I said market the API here is because if the data you have, if you are in a domain whereby the data you have, the business you have, you keep having requests from people, right? You keep having requests, or you have some target market and all that. You have data or you have information that you think other people would need, will be key for them. You can go and meet them and just say, okay, you are into this, you're into this business. Okay, I have resources I can assist you with. I have resources I can assist you with. And to assist you with that resources, there's an API. There's an API I have access to my system that will be fetching you all that information, right? So all that is what we call the marketing. So you market the API, you put it online. If you want to give it out for free, you can put it online on your website if you have, right? If you want to make it not free, like maybe probably they will have to pay. Yes, you can design that structure for yourself, whereby they will request for your sub, they will request for your API, but they will have to pay. They will have to pay, and then you give them the API. Give them the API. So after that, you give them the API. So that is just it. So anyhow you intend to go about marketing your API, fine for you. You just have to look at businesses or entities or organizations that have the resources that need and want to use the resources you have. That is just it. And then go to them. So just as Amazon is an online marketplace for retail, API marketplaces exist for developers to buy and sell other APIs. So listing your API can allow you to monetize it. Absolutely. For example, now let me give you an as an individual or as an organization or as an individual. Let me stick to individual. As an individual that you are, you can create an application, your application, right? That probably will require map services, location services. First of all, I would say location services, and these location services, you want to you want to make it so you want to make it so modern, not modern. You want to integrate a map to it, right? There is Google Map, but you want to embed a map inside your own application. You can embed Google Map inside your own application rather than open Google Map, right? Let's say let's say you are inviting me to a party, to an occasion, and you send me a location via your app, right? So inside your app, I can open Google Map if you integrate it. And how do you integrate Google Map to your application, custom application? You can do that by using Google Map API. So Google Map has an API, right? There's an API, so it exists. You can get it from Google. You can get it online, right? So you can integrate it into your application, into your custom application. Not Google Map, into your custom application. You can integrate it. And if you integrate it, it will open in your application as if it's your own map, not Google Map. So you don't need to open Google Map. So your application will now host the map. So so that is it. So and other services, a lot of services like that do exist, whereby whereby you have the services, you have the products, right? So you just have to just get the API and then boom, put it inside your system, and then you're up and ready to go. You're up and ready to go. So it's no magic. So some things is even like we said, like we mentioned earlier, it's even much cheaper and all that. Just imagine now you want to develop a marketplace, right? You want to develop a marketplace and all that. So because you have the skills, okay, even the payment gateway, you want to create your own payment gateway. Come on, that's not so like you can just call in an existing payment gateways. We have them, the existing payment gateways. You can then get API and then integrate it into your system, and then shikena, you have a payment gateway. And when a payment is made, then you give them your key, and then it will be directed into your account. So any other question? Okay, I have a okay. It says the listed API one market is what is referred to as go. It has to be a full software before it can be SaaS. So the listed API. Okay, I get your question. So it says the listed API, one market, right? Is that what is referred to as SaaS, SaaS, right? Or SaaS? For those of you, it says server as a service. That is what it stands for. Server as a service. Or it has to be a full software before it can be SaaS. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be a full software. It doesn't have to be a full software. However, when you talk of SaaS, right? Server as a service, right? Is a is, let's say, an entity. Permit me to, is entity the right word? Okay, let me say a business, right? They provide server services. They provide services. I don't know if that's make statement. Sorry, I don't know if that statement makes sense. For example, we have Firebase. I don't know if you know Firebase. So Firebase, they provide you with services like server services. Basically, what that means is when you are developing your software, your system, right, and you need a server, you don't have to from scratch. You don't have to from scratch create your own server or build your own server. You can just subscribe to their services, and they'll give you every single thing, every server services. You will just create your system. You just create your system based on that to work on that, and then you're good to go. So server as a service basically means that you are providing maybe like storage, you are providing storage, database, and resources and other services and other services. Meanwhile, other people can just develop their own front end. Other people can just develop their own front end system, and then they will just maybe subscribe to your back end services, and then that's just it. So that is it. Before initially before the SaaS started, when you are developing a system online and everything, you have to do everything by yourself. You have to develop the front end, the back end, and everything. You have to get your servers. You get a server room. You have to get a server room, buy a lot of machines, a lot of equipment to equip the server room, air condition to cool it down and all that. But presently, because of the stress that's involving in managing those servers, so we have these providers now. They provide you with the services, right? They provide you with the services. Is it a storage? Is it a storage where you want to store files, any kind of files, media files? Is it audio, video, images, documents, and all that? So they provide you with that services. They provide you with a database. They provide you with authentication. They provide you with authentication services. All these, you see, they are services that the server does, right? So they provide you with all that. All you need to do is just develop your own front end, and then mount it on that, connect it with that their back end. So that is just it, and then mount it on their server. Chicken, and they will just be just be handling everything for you, and it's even more efficient, more even more cost friendly to do that presently. So you remember we mentioned API testing is basically like software testing, right? So API testing strategies are similar to other software testing methodologies. The main focus on is on validating server responses. So when you're talking of testing APIs, right? What you will be concerned about is ensuring that the API All right. Can you hear me now, please? Hello. Hi. Okay. Thank you. Sorry for that break in transmission. Sorry for that break in transmission. Yes. So So let's proceed. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. That is great. You can see and hear me now. All right. So I guess it was part of the network. So let's quickly move on and then try to round up. So now, all right, let's talk about let me go back a little bit. Let's talk about API testing. API testing. So API testing strategies are similar to other software testing methodologies. Remember earlier on I said software testing, right, and API testing are almost similar. So yes, so they have similar methodologies. However, but for API testing, the main focus is on validating the server responses. When you're testing the API, when you're testing for API, all you want to be focused on is the responses from the server. Because an API is connecting you to a server, you are making a response. After making a response, of course, you'll be expect. Sorry, after making a request. Sorry, permit me. Sorry for that. I mean a request. After making a request, if you make a request, of course, you'll be expecting a response. All right. You'll be expecting a response after making the request. So now, what you'll be focusing on during API testing is responses from the server. So now, you made a request. You wanted information, so data, so data from the system. Are you getting that what you are requesting? If you are getting it, is it coming the way you want it to come? Right? Are you receiving it the way you want it to? Are you receiving it the way you want to receive it? Right? Is there any error that happens? Is there any error that happens within that medium of communication? So that is just the focus of API testing. And this API testing, it includes making multiple requests to API endpoints for performance testing, right? So what this means is that it will not suffice after you just building the API and then you just test it once. After testing it once and then you get a response. You get a response. Oh, like fine, it's working. It's working. That shouldn't be enough. Try it multiple times. Test it multiple times. So you have to make multiple requests to the API endpoint for performance testing. That is to test the performance. How is it perform? How is it performing? Right? Yes, it's working. Initially, you did it first time. It's working. Yes, it's working. But is it working the way it's supposed to be? Is it working as it should be? How much time does it take? What does it require? How long does it take and all that? So you have to keep testing to check the performance, to see how it behaves in terms of performance also, right? So that is that. So next, after doing all that, you have to write unit tests for checking business logics and functional correctness. So unit test. So let me explain unit test. In software engineering, there are different types of tests. When you're testing a software, there's a different types of tests. First, we have what we call the white box, white box testing, right? You have the black box testing, right? Those are some different categories of tests. And then we have what we call unit testing, right? Unit testing. You have integration testing. So here it says writing unit tests for checking business logic and functional correctness. So unit testing I'm mentioning here is like you are developing a system, an application that has so many different functions. Uh, um, one of the functions of the system is okay, like you have a registration system. you have a registration function on the system, right? That users can create, that anybody applicant can create, that can register on the system registration. After registration, probably you have another function that is search, right? On your own, and you want to search and see, okay, how many people have registered on the system, how many people exist, or you want to search for whatever it is, right? And you have, after searching, you have reporting, right? That will let you to generate reports, right? So you see, these are three different functions. I mentioned registration, right? Search, right? And then report, right? These are three different functions. So now, unit testing involves testing only a single unit of that function. Okay, is it the registration? Okay, you just want to be testing registration. Okay, the registration is working fine, it's working fine, it's working fine. You've tested it so many times. Okay, provide the necessary information, necessary data, provide the necessary data, upload all the relevant documents required, everything. Okay, your registration. Okay, it's working perfectly fine. It's going to the database. You've gone to the database. You've checked. Yes, the information is there. And after successful registration, it's returning feedback saying, okay, your registration is successful. Thank you, and so so so. Maybe this is your registration ID and all that. You've been testing that. It's working perfectly fine. So that is unit testing. So now, when you talk of integration testing, when you talk of integration testing, right, it encompasses it encompasses like integrating all the functions together and then testing them. You are not isolating any component of the system. You are not isolating any part of the system and then testing it only that particular system. You are now testing to see everything works. You are now testing to see everything works as it should be. So integration testing on the other hand involve, okay, you have to search. Okay, searching was one of the functions, right? Okay, you are searching the system. Okay, after searching the system is successful, and then you are now trying to make a report based on your search. So that is integrate. That is, you're now selecting. Okay, you're now selecting your maybe persons of interest, and then you want to generate some reports. You want to generate reports based on the persons of interest you've selected, you've searched, right? So that is integration testing. Okay, you are now searching. Okay, if this you are now searching. Okay, if your search returns a result, you now select uh you now select your persons of interest. After selecting your persons of interest, you now generate some report. After generating a report, probably you can send the report for printing or send it to an email or maybe even download it, right? So all this one put together, like the function, like the flow of the system, use of the system, flow of the feature. That is integration testing. So now when we talk about the API, so one of the activities that is usually done during unit testing, during testing API, is writing unit tests for checking the business logic and functional correctness. So that is just it. And the next we have security testing by simulating system attack. Very, very key. Very, very key. The last one is very, very key. Security testing by simulating system attack. Remember I told you, like, for every time you are working with systems online, you have to be conscious of the cyber. You have to be conscious of the cyber world, of the cyber reality. Sorry, let me say the cyber reality. You have to be conscious of the cyber reality. How prone is the system to attack? Yes. So is your API, can it be used for attack, right? Can it facilitate attack? Is it easy? Is it porous? Is it and all that? You have to look at all that. So you have to test the system. You have to test security by looking at attack. So for that, probably you might get some ethical hackers. You might get some ethical hackers to do that for you, to check that for you. All right. So let's talk about how to use an API. You want to use an API for your business, for your transaction, for everything you are doing. You want to use an API. So the steps to implement a new API include obtaining an API key. Earlier on, I gave you an example of Google, right? Google Map, where you want to integrate it into your application, into your custom application. You want to integrate Google Map into your custom application. All you have to do, truth be told, is to get an API key from Google. All you have to do is just to get an API key. So if you get an API key, you just integrate it into your Google application and then into your application, and then when you run it, you see the Google Map will appear inside your application. It's no big deal. It's no rocket science. It's actually not that of a big deal. You just integrate the API key into it. So this is done by creating a verified account with the API provider. You see? So it says that to get the API key, it's being done by creating a verified account with the API provider. That is just it. Likewise with the payment gateway, you get the API key, but you have to register with them. Of course, you have to verify that okay, this guy, okay, it's you are a registered business. Let's see your CAC. It's here. Good. Do you pay tax? Good. All those kind of things. You have to verify your business is legit, right? Which means they verify you have an account with them. They say, okay, so we are giving you our API key. Go and use it. Right? So that is how it is to get an API key. Likewise with Google, you have to have a Google account. You have to have a Google account. You have to have an account with Google before they can give you Google developers account and all that. Before they can give you an API key to use their map. Yes. So next is set up an HTTP API client. This tool allows you to structure the API request easily using the API keys received. So basically, what this means is setting up an HTTP API client is this is you on your own end, like your application, right? Your application, the software you want to use that API for. So that is just basically what we are talking about here. Make a provision where you will put the API key that will send a request and then receive it, right? So if you don't have an API client, you can try to structure the request yourself in your browser by referring to the API documentation. So that is that. So once you are comfortable with the new API syntax, you can start using it in your code. Yeah. So that is it. To use an API is simple. So yeah. So just get the API key after registering with the API provider. For example, like the NIMSI example I gave you earlier. Of course, them too. I guess you will have to register with them. If you register with them, they will give you, and then you can integrate into your employee recruitment system, right? You can integrate into your employee recruitment system, and then that is all that. So how to write an API documentation? Let's look at this. How do you write an API documentation? So writing comprehensive API documentation is part of the API management process. Of course, there's a process of managing API, right? So it's a lot of API management process. API documentation can be auto-generated using tools or written manually. So of course, the documentation for your API. Now we have what we now we have generative AIs, right? That they can just poof in seconds creates a whole lot of documents for you, a whole lot of writings, a whole lot of tools. So it can be auto-generated using tools or written manually, and you can decide to write your API documentation manually. So, however, whenever you want to do that, there are some best practices that you should do in doing that. So, one, writing explanations in simple. Of course, development, software development on its own is a bit, let me not say challenging, time consuming, right? A resource, it's time consuming and resource consuming. So you don't want to waste the developer's time. You don't want to give the developer, you don't want to give the developer another more headache because he's working with your API, because he wants to work with your API. So your explanations should be simple, easy to read, easy to read language, right? Documents generated by tools can become wordy and require editing. So secondly, using code samples to explain functionality. So what this basically means is that when you're explaining how to integrate your API, how to use your API, you should provide a sample code. You should provide a sample code on how that is being done, how that should be done. Maybe the particular point or position in the code. Because there are some API providers, they will just give you the code. Wow, everything. They'll just give you the code, like, okay, just carry this particular code. If you are using Java or Python or so programming languages, okay, just copy this as it is, the code like this. One, paste it inside your application, and then do the necessary editing, maybe of your variables, and then that is just it. Some they do that. They provide all that information. So using code samples to explain functionalities. So next is maintaining the documentation so it is accurate and up to date. Like here in the tech world, in the IT field, things change like rapidly, almost on daily basis. It change rapidly. New technologies, new approaches to things, they change rapidly on a daily basis. So it will be nice to always maintain your documentation, right? So it is accurate and up to date. So if there's any changes, you quickly reflect it. If there's anything, quickly reflect it so that the API, so that everything will be up to date. Next is we keep having new developers every time. People that are really not too that experienced, and probably maybe it's not that your system might the system probably the person is coming across your product or system or whatever it is for the first time and all that. So when you are writing, when you're writing your API documentation, you have to consider people that are beginners, right? So that's why I say make it as simple as possible. Make the integration as simple as possible. I remember one time, one story, there was somebody that was trying to integrate one function on the system. I think just integrating the API, it took a whole lot of days trying to work on the API, trying to work with the API for that particular company. It took so many days. At some point, person got frustrated and then went to the competitor, the business competitor of that person, of that particular business, and secured another API that was easy to use, just direct. So you see, like when you make your API hard to use, hard to understand, and all that, you drive away. You might lose customers. If you have another competitor in your business, you are going to lose customers. You are going to lose customers when you do that. So just make it as simple as easy as possible. And the last but not the least, covering all the problems the API can solve for the users. So in your documentation, it would be nice, ideal to cover all the problems the API can solve for the users. That is that actually they are using your API to solve a problem. That is the point. That is why they are using, be it whatever kind of problem, just know that your API is being used to solve a problem, right? So convince them, let them know, show them that your API solves all that particular problem, will assist them in solving all that particular problem or whatever it is. Because even the system they are developing to solve a problem. That is the truth. They are developing the system to solve the problem, and then they needed something from you to further assist them in solving the problem, right? So make sure like everything in your documentation API, like it covers all the problem. So that is just it. So I think for this particular session, we have talked on API. At this point, we are going to we are going to put a stop to it because we've got to an end of this theoretical session. So on the next class, which is the practical class, like I mentioned earlier, we are developing a system, an e-commerce system. So we are going to see how we can integrate. We are going to see how we are going to use an API for that, like to be specific, like the payment gateways, the API for payment gateway and all that. Yes. So by the grace of God, if you're able to join us during the practical session, so we'll see how we can do all that in actual. So for now, I'll use this remaining time left to entertain questions from my audience, from you people. Please, if you have any question, please do not hesitate. I'm here, please. Let's ask the questions. So thank you very much. Okay, I'm still waiting for questions, but have not received any. So I guess and I believe, which means there's no question. However, if there's any at any point in time, you can please drop a question on the what is it called, on the platform, on the online platform. You can always drop a question, and we can attend to it at any time. Please do not hesitate. So presently, in the absence of no any other questions, I think we call this session, we call it a day. Call it a day. So thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience, and thank you for your understanding. Thank you. So see you next week for this. See you next week for the for this theoretical session, and see you on Saturday for the practical session. So do have a wonderful day. Thank you, and God bless you. Bye bye.